Salon has an article titled "Whose Lives Really Matter: How Racism Colors Coverage of the Crisis in Ukraine." Now, I do agree the coverage is extremely biased. Uh, I mean, completely different type of bias than the bias that they had covering their America's adventures in the Middle East, bombing Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq. Completely different tone on the you know what I mean, illegal invasions, incursions into other sovereign territories. So there's that type of bias. But this is Salon, and all their authors, the left's perspective is they've been viewing everything through identity politics and like the identity intersectionality and the hierarchies and stuff like that. So that's the lens that they always want to view everything from, because race to them is the most utmost important thing. And so how can they view this conflict through a racial lens, even though Russians and Ukrainians are pretty much the same people they consider themselves. I mean, I'm sure there's radical people on both sides that consider those completely, but basically they're family. So it's a war between two white people, but how can they spin it through a racial lens? Let's check it out. Now, first off, the coverage is biased. Is in terms of, but not because of race per se. I mean, they might have something to do with it, but because it was the most obvious is it was actual Americans doing that to other people. Well, it's Americans invading other countries, and Americans don't feel safe. They need to root out, expand their influence in all wars, all invasions are just a country expanding the country just wants to expand its influence. America thought that really was afraid of Iran, and I mean Israel was really afraid of like Iran, so they thought they're going to take over Iraq, expand their influence. Iraq's going to be this thriving democracy, Jeffersonian democracy that's going to love America, and that's going to put, you know what I mean? They're going to bring the war and bring pressure to Iran, because Iran is the real bad guy, even though none of the 9/11 perpetrators were from Iran. It was from the ally Saudi Arabia, but that's just details. That's just neither here nor there. So yeah, when America's expanding its influence and throwing its weight around, that's aside for some libertarian podcasts and stuff like that. Usually the mainstream media, the corporate media, the coverage is positive, or there's now Russia's doing the same thing. Well, you're a fucking Putin is Hitler, and he's what I mean. He's trying to either remake the Soviet Union, but like a neo-Nazi white Soviet Union, Christian Soviet Union. Which is kind of funny because the left loves the Soviet Union. But is it a race thing, though? I mean, probably could be a little bit. Although I would say Syria, when America was trying to inflame the revolution and topple, not Gaddafi, Bashar al-Assad. I mean, Syrians were, and some people consider them as basically white. But I guess, were they living too far away, or they really didn't care? I mean, they're like fomenting, like giving weapons to ISIS and terrorists to topple their secular dictator. I mean, America didn't think anything of it. There wasn't that much. I mean, there was coverage of the brutality or whatever, but they never went into the role of America's actually funding insurgencies and funding terrorists or whatever. No, they're just, and then of course they covered, well, it's how horrible Russia is about bombing the terrorists or whatever. But it's mainly Is it the case of the Francis Fukuyama end of history? It's Americans' cultural hegemony, the Western way of thinking. It's pushing. It's started, and to post-war Germany expanded, and then it's trying to bring the West and its values up to the Russian border, and then to kind of just keep pushing Russia until Russia turns, overthrow the Putin's regime. And when Putin lashed out and smacked the playing blocks, turned over the card game, then of course they're gonna flip out. Especially if Putin is successful, and then it's like, oh no, you're gonna, the West's influence is retreating. So, reflecting on that dynamic, much of the coverage of the Ukraine war by the mainstream news media is advancing a narrative which implies that the lives of white people, especially when they are Christian European, are more important than those of non-white people and Muslims. Well, what about just a simpler explanation? That they didn't care about Yemen because it was America doing that, helping the Saudi Arabia. They didn't care about Iraq, Afghanistan, because it was America doing that to them. So then would they want death on American soldiers? Even people on the left can't go that far, because the left thinks of them as, oh well, that those are the poor blue collar workers or whatever. That's those are the poor guys. But wishing death on Russian soldiers, that's no problem. Rulers divide the world into worthy and unworthy victims. Those are allowed to pity, such as Ukrainians enduring the hell of modern warfare, and those whose suffering is minimized, dismissed, or ignored. It's not that worthy victims do not suffer, nor that they do not deserve of support and compassion. It's that the worthy victims alone are rendered human. People like us, and unworthy victims are not. It helps, of course, when as in Ukraine, they are white. Race is a modern concept, and it was an invention of roughly the 15th century at the outset of European global project colonialism, imperialism, which blah, blah, blah. So a lefty article would never be one without mentioning imperialism, slave trade, genocide against black and brown indigenous people around the world. Okay, for example, in practice, this means that race made real and can be unmade by society's individuals, where there's no, quote, white people in Europe prior to the invention of... this is pretty rich. This is so fucking rich. You coming from a lefty author that says race is made real and can be made unmade. How can the left unmake race if that is their single focus? That's the whole leftist project, is focusing on race, dividing people up by race, looking at what with their the economic status, the college achievement, birth rates, this, and say, hey, we have uneven amount of people, black people that make less money than Asians, or not. Well, they wouldn't go Asians; they would say white, or Hispanics make more money than black. That's the whole project. How can you make race irrelevant if you're always counting the racial beans? Unless they, you can't make sense of that. Unless you come to this utopia where you get this perfect Bernie Sanders socialist government, and that equalizes everything by race. All races are equal on every single count. And then the left can, you know what? Now that everybody's racial, people really feel their racial identity, we're all the same now. Black, white, whatever. We're all going to be colorblind now. That's just... I can't even think of anything dumber than that. So no, the left has no intention unmaking race. They're only inflaming it I mean, racism is pretty much dead on life support, but it's pretty much dead, but on life support from, you know what I mean, from the left, some sort of elements of it. There were no white people in Europe prior to the invention of the race concept. Other identities, religion, class, religion, language, claim, clan, birth, people, country, native, nation were primary. Okay. From before the founding through the present, America remains a society structured by race and racial inequality. What has this to do with Ukraine? Social scientists and other experts repeatedly shown that black and brown people's life opportunities are disadvantaged across almost every area of American society when compared to white people as a group. Yeah, but you're leaving out context. That what if Asian families are actually more advantaged than white people? It's like, is there racism against white people? No. It's just to historical events and other forces. People are, if you lump giant groups of people into categories such as white, black, Asian, Hispanic, they're going to be different. Okay, their ages are going to be different. Their culture is going to be different. So of course they're going to have different outcomes. You're shooting for the utopia where everybody has the exact same thing. I mean, like maybe in a prison. It's in a prison mess hall. You can all eat the same exact food and have the same square footage of cells. I mean, other than that, I mean, it's going to be inequality, obviously. Especially if you want to have a thriving economy where people are free to make their own choices or open businesses, and in all assumption that white people's lives are more valuable to society is like kind of cultural oxymoron. To challenge it with the assertion that Black Lives Matter is to invoke rage and backlash so extreme that tens of millions of Americans are willing to destroy their own democracy and society in a racist temper tantrum embodied by Trumpism and neo-fascism. Well, nice overgeneralization. Basically, during the civil rights movement, white Americans in society in general were promised that we're going to give civil rights to everybody, and nobody's going to be better than anybody else. Everybody's going to be treated exactly the same. People got on board with that. But now that same civil rights movement is turning the tables saying, oh, because this group is disadvantaged or this group didn't have the same opportunities, now this group should be elevated above other ones for equality. And nobody ever agreed to that. And of course there's going to be a backlash to it now. One of the most important lessons of the Russian war against Ukraine is that the whole world continues to watch, respond, and take cues from not only American and Western power, but more tellingly, the power of our example. No single ethnic, racial, and religious group has greater capacity for civilization, personal dignity, or citizenship than others. Now that it's time to stand with all Ukrainians, immigrants, refugees seeking refuge from a storm of war. I mean, that's pretty rich. So now you're claiming equality now. Everybody is exactly the same. And when people agree to that, then you're going to turn the tables and it's like, well, we are ethnic groups are not equal, so we need to fix that. We need to, as far as hiring, we need to hire more from this group or that group. Yes, I know Group A is more qualified. Applicant A is more qualified than B, but you see historical oppression, and therefore, we're gonna put our thumbs on the scale. We're gonna make race the number one concern. That's the bait and switch. Always. The Ukraine conflict has complicated origins, but it's also clear that Vladimir Putin is a hero of global right, which includes the various neo-fascists, white supremacists, racial chauvinists, the Proud Boys, and allied forces who dream of creating a new white Christian empire. I mean, if you actually look at white supremacists and what they write, I mean, they don't consider Russians as proper white people, and B, if he did any kind of research, Russia is not like a white Christian. Russia's pretty diverse. Has a ton of people from the Middle East, from the Caucasus areas. Has a lot of Asian people. There's so many languages, like probably there's hundreds of different languages spoken in Russia, even more than the United States. So to try to generalize that, like, oh, especially what Putin is doing. No, it has nothing to do with the buildup of NATO and on his doorstep and whatever, and then him being the possibility of him being toppled. No. He always talks. He talks about the white Christian empire, or you got to read in between the lines. Resisting and defeating Putin will weaken those forces as well and strengthen both American and global democracy. Does you mean strengthen America's hegemony on the world? That is a struggle that people of conscience on both sides of the color line should unite behind. Yeah, but there are a lot of people of all sorts of different colors that are resisting black and brown people, that are resisting Americans' hegemony, that just want to be left alone. Okay.